Members of the Vatican's Swiss Guard resign due to the Holy See's COVID mandate, while defendants in a Vatican sex abuse trial are cleared of charges. The National Catholic Register's Edward Pentin reports from Rome. Communist China turns up the heat on Taiwan, and Joe Biden openly promotes Planned Parenthood. President of the Population Research Institute, Stephen MOSHER, is here with reaction. Finally, Bishop ATHANASIUS SCHNEIDER of Kazakhstan weighs in on the Synod and previews his new book on the liturgy, The Catholic Mass. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We've got a big show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening and a special announcement. First, according to a report released this week, hundreds of thousands of minors in France have been victims of sexual abuse by Catholic clergy since 1950. The 2,500-page report was commissioned by the French Catholic Church in 2018. It was based on data from court and police archives, as well as testimony from victims. The estimated number of cases, well over 250,000, has dwarfed the numbers reported by other countries who have also reckoned with the sex abuse crisis and related cover-up. The report showed atrocities committed not only by priests, but also nuns and other church employees. According to Vatican spokesman Matteo Bruni, Pope Francis learned of the report with sorrow and expressed gratitude for victims' courage in speaking out. The commission found a minimum over 3,000 abusers from a total of 115,000 priests, other clerics, and church representatives over a 70-year period. We'll continue to monitor this tragic story. And Sweden and Denmark are halting Moderna COVID vaccines for some younger patients due to potential side effects. Sweden's health authority on Wednesday pointed to data showing increased chance of heart inflammation for their decision to stop giving the vaccine to those under 30. Denmark will discontinue using the Moderna vaccine for those under 18. Both nations are recommending Pfizer vaccines instead. According to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, nearly 4,000 have died in the U.S. after taking the Moderna COVID vaccination, nearly 11,000 after taking Pfizer. Speaking of Pfizer, a whistleblower says that the pharmaceutical giant used human fetal tissue in lab tests of its COVID-19 vaccine and told employees to keep quiet about it. Melissa Strickler, a former Pfizer employee, made those claims to Project Veritas creator James O'Keefe. Several other former and current Pfizer employees have made similar claims. As of yet, there's been no official response offered by Pfizer regarding the allegations. And on Wednesday, the Vatican's first abuse trial concluded. And the German Synodal Path takes an alarming turn. Joining me to discuss this and much more is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Ed, thanks for being here. Father Gabriele Martinelli was acquitted of charges of violent sexual assault alleged to have taken place at the Pius X pre-seminary in Rome between 2006 and 2012. Now, that's the seminary inside the walls of the Vatican. The school's former rector, Father Enrico Radice, was cleared of charges of cover-up. Now, a judge did find that Father Martinelli, who was a former altar boy who served the Pope, had actually engaged in a sexual relationship with a slightly younger peer during his time at the pre-seminary. But they claimed there was no evidence of coercion. The court also found evidence of another crime, corruption of a minor, but said that the statutes of limitations had expired by 4 years when the lawsuit was filed in 2018. What's been the reaction to all of this in Rome, to these rulings by the Vatican court?
Well, it's been quite muted, really, Raymond, because a lot of it's been overshadowed by the big financial trial, which is going on at the same time. But I think there was a certain amount of surprise. I think the Vatican prosecutors wanted to hand down sentences of 2 to 4 years, I believe, to each of them. But as they came to their conclusions, they realized that, at least the judge realized that there wasn't enough evidence, as you said, and it wasn't enough to punish them. So I think generally, I think the reaction is, well, they've accepted that verdict, and there isn't much more to say about this case than what's already been said in the verdict. But certainly it's of concern, because this pre-seminary, I think, has had problems in the past. It's had some criticisms about the behavior of some of the people within it, and the Pope, in fact, has moved it from inside the Vatican to outside the Vatican. He did that, I think, last year, and so that steps have been taken to try to clean it up. But certainly, there's some not so good things going on there, which are of some concern, I think.
Well, the other concerning thing here, Ed, is many Vatican officials, including Pope Francis, had received written warning of a potential crime taking place by Martinelli at that pre-seminary beginning in 2013. However, the Vatican only brought indictments against Martinelli and Radici 6 years later, after a surge of Italian media coverage. Reports have detailed how Martinelli, who's now 29, had risen to the priesthood with the help of prelates who brushed off those initial accusations and conducted only cursory investigations. What does this say about the Vatican's promises to crack down on abuse? And why the kind of ho-hum attitude over having sex with another seminarian, coerced or not?
Well, exactly. And this has been a criticism for some time of the Vatican and the hierarchy, that when it comes to the relations between sort of consenting, these weren't adults, but consenting adults, then it all seems to be okay. So, yeah, there is that concern that this is being brushed under the carpet a little bit too easily, that there are, as I said earlier, serious problems within the pre-seminary, but also in the way this case was dealt with, which haven't really been addressed. And but I think once this big financial trial is over, I think people or the media might return to this case and look at it in more detail, I expect.
Moving on to that other trial you mentioned a moment ago at the Vatican, the largest financial criminal trial in the history of the Catholic Church is now taking place. The chief defendant is Cardinal Angelo Becciu. Now, until 2019, he had been one of the city-state's most powerful clerics, the sostituto, the substitute. Becciu directed the Vatican's day-to-day operations. All of this concerns a London property deal, which saw a 350 million euro investment turn into a 100 million euro loss for the Vatican. With this trial, Pope Francis has signaled that he's serious about cleaning up the Vatican's finances. However, a recent report in Forbes magazine suggests that there's much drama behind the scenes, and that among new revelations are that, quote, the Pope received a damning briefing about Cardinal Becciu, now on trial years before he was indicted, yet let him remain in his position. Francis approved the raid that suddenly pitted the Vatican's prosecutors against its financial watchdog. An outside director says he attempted to meet with Francis to warn him about the approaching legal catastrophe and was blocked. Insiders use the term friends of Francis to explain why some Vatican officials are being prosecuted and others aren't. Who decides, Ed, who gets prosecuted in a Vatican court?
Well, it's really the job of the promoter of justice, the Vatican prosecutors, who conducted a 2-year investigation before this trial took place, and they believe that the 10 that they've indicted are the ones that most guilty. But I spoke actually today to the deputy prosecutor who did a lot of the investigations, and he said, in fact, that Cardinal Becciu was not originally on the list of those to be investigated, but because he interfered with the investigation so much, they included him in the list of indictments. So it's all a bit difficult to know exactly how they came to these indictments and the sort of evidence that they chose. And in fact, that's one of the criticisms of the defense, that they haven't actually been questioned. And that came up at the hearings yesterday and the day before yesterday. And in fact, they want to know, why weren't they questioned before the trial took place? Why weren't those recordings of their interrogations recorded for the trial? And so that's why this has been adjourned, one of the reasons at least, until November the 17th, I believe.
And surely Cardinal Becciu's boss at the time, Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, that he would have had some knowledge of this deal.
Yes, I mean, certainly he seems to have known about it and had quite a lot to do with it. But yes, I think there's certain characters within this certain figures rather, who haven't been called to testify yet. But I think we may see that happen, and that we may see Cardinal Parolin and maybe a few others being indicted, or at least summoned to the court to give evidence.
In the Forbes report, Mark Odnall, who is a board member of the Vatican's financial watchdog, also known as the Vatican's Financial Information Authority, he resigned following the raid in 2019 of the Vatican financial offices. He said, quote, "The person responsible for this is the Pope. He has made the wrong decisions and appointed the wrong people, all the while pretending he is fighting against bad people," end quote. Is that a wider sentiment surrounding this trial in Rome and in Italy?
Well, I mean, one's heard over the past year or two that all of what happened in this terrible London deal that went wrong, that everybody knew about it from top to bottom, from the very top right down to the lowest official who was involved in it. And so I think certain fingers will be pointed at the Pope about this, and how much did he know, and when did he know it? And I think he won't be called to trial, of course, but I think there are questions about what he knew and how much he allowed this to go forward. And now a lot of this started, I think, yes, before he became Pope. I think the original deal happened, I think, in 2012 or 2011. And so I think there wasn't, he can't blame him for that, but I think it was the way it was handled afterwards, of course, where the losses were made. And we really don't know how much he knew. But certainly those higher up, whether it was Cardinal Becciu or perhaps his replacement, Archbishop Pena, I think they seem to know a lot about the actual deal, as well as Cardinal Parolin, of course.
As you alluded to a moment ago, this trial is not going so well. On Wednesday, the president of the tribunal, Giuseppe Pinatone, ruled that the prosecutors had deprived 10 defendants of their rights and ordered prosecutors to turn over key pieces of evidence and redo their investigation for some of these suspects. He said that there have been, quote, lamentable violations by the Pope's prosecutors in failing to give suspects the chance to respond to the accusations and during that preliminary phase of the investigation. Now, prosecutors have to redo their entire investigations. How long will this take? And what does this look like to you, Ed?
Well, I mean, they've only got a month to do it. I think their deadline is early November, where they've got to really submit submit all the evidence which they hadn't submitted, which they were supposed to have deposited at the court by August 9th, and they didn't do it. So they've got to do that by November. But I think there are various other things as well, which are lots of concerns about, as well as the fact, speaking, as I said earlier, with Alessandro Didi, who's a deputy prosecutor in all of this, and he says actually that the laws of the Vatican actually don't demand that these interrogations take place before the trial. And he said that he's never known it happen before. So he was basically following the rules set in place for Vatican trials, and he feels that he hadn't done anything wrong. And so he was quite surprised when this was these complaints came to his door. So he's going to go along with it, but as I say, I think they're basically going by the rules, and so they're not so happy with this. But of course, it's very good for the defence. It gives them a chance to see all the evidence and to be questioned. It certainly gives them a chance or it gives their lawyers a chance to strengthen their cases. So it does work very much in their favour, I think.
There are a lot of moving parts and backstage intrigues in this story. I would direct people to your reporting on this and the Forbes piece this week, which was kind of, a flyover. You wrote a piece about how concerned German Catholics are about the direction of that German synodal way. They've published a reform initiative opposing the controversial Synodal Path. They argue that the abuse crisis that triggered this Synodal Path has been used in order to implement, quote, a well-known political ecclesiastical agenda. How widespread are these concerns?
It's hard to say, Raymond. I mean, certainly there's a sort of groundswell of opinion, I think, among certain faithful in Germany who have been rather silent until now, and I think they're speaking up, and they've just really had enough of it. I think they feel that it's going too far. Certainly since the big meeting this week with the Synodal Path, where they all assembled in Frankfurt for the second time of the Synodal Path, they realized that there's a lot that they're pushing through, a lot of radical programs, and they just don't like it. They want it to be faithful to the Church's tradition and teaching, and they think that it's basically been hijacked by a group of radicals who are intent on changing the Church through this process. And what I think disturbs them particularly is that they want to make this binding, that they want this to be really set in stone, these changes, which they voted on this week about how they wanted to have blessings for same-sex unions, and even called in the existence of the priesthood. They wanted to debate whether the priesthood was needed. People think, well, you couldn't really make it up. It's just gone way over the top. And I think that's what these lay faithful think. And so they've set up a website. They're quite well organized. And I think we may well hear more of them as time goes, from them as time goes on.
Yeah, and we should note, Pope Francis has warned them about these blessings for same-sex unions. There was a letter that went to the German bishops, but they seem to be sort of looking the other way. I mean, they voted that they'd like to explore opening up all kinds of, not only the priesthood and whether the priesthood should exist in its current form, but blessings for same-sex unions as well. And given these results and the votes, are German bishops concerned that this might spark a split from Rome? And will extending this synod to 2023 help change the so-called progressive views here?
Yes. Well, I've heard from a group of anonymous Germans, they don't want to be named, but I'm going to put this out hopefully tomorrow, that they're very concerned that the bishops, particularly, I think that they say that the majority of the bishops, not the big majority, but most of them, are deeply disturbed by this, but they're so scared about it all, they're afraid to actually speak up. And so you only have a very small number, like the Bishop of Regensburg and Cardinal Woelki, until he was banished until March because of the situation in Cologne. But yes, so there are some bishops who really want to complain, but they don't stand up to it. And I think by extending it to 2023, this is probably going to go in the favor of those who are trying to push the radical agenda. I don't think that's going to. I think it's going to harm their program. At least that's how it seems to me. It seems that it'll give them a chance to really push through their programs.
Yeah, and as you've reported, Cardinal Walter Kasper, certainly no radical traditionalist, has wondered whether the synodal path of the Church of Germany is entirely Catholic. He supports a counter-proposal made by the Bishop of Regensburg. What is that counter-proposal?
Yes, well, the counter-proposal is very similar, really, to what the lay group are doing. It's really to bring back the synod back to being faithful to the Church's teaching and tradition. And they put out a paper regarding one of the forums about authority and power in the Church, and basically it upholds the current structure of the hierarchy, which the Synodal Path really wants to overturn. And so it's very much keeping in line with the magisterium of the Church and keeping it faithful to her teaching. And to have Cardinal Kasper give words of support to that is, as you say, quite interesting and unexpected. But he is genuinely concerned about it. He sees the German synodal path as being very different to the Pope's idea of synodality, and he sees it really as going off on a tangent and really not being controlled and not, as we say, not being faithful to tradition. But as Cardinal Kasper says, he doesn't believe it's even faithful to the Second Vatican Council either.
There's also the case, and you mentioned him earlier, the Cardinal of Cologne, who is the only other major synod critic here. Now, my understanding, what I've read in the reports, is that it looks like Pope Francis has placed him on sabbatical until March when the synod is over. What's going on here?
Yes, well, at least the synod was supposed to end in February 2022, February next year, but now it's been extended to 2023. And that might explain why I think a lot of Cardinal Woelki's opponents within the Synodal Path, and there were many, were very disappointed that he wasn't asked to resign and his resignation accepted by the Pope, because now he can come back in March and be a critic again, a very vocal critic of the Synodal Path. And so it does give him that chance. But it did seem as though, until this Synodal Path is extended, that he was basically put into the long grass, as it were, until the Synodal Path was going to be finished in February, which of course would have been very convenient for those pushing the agendas.
Yeah, well, this collision course between the German Church and Rome is certainly coming. I mean, they are completely ignoring Pope Francis's guidance on this and going on their own way. They may have to keep going if they continue. At the Vatican on Monday, the Feast of St. Francis, faith leaders and scientists who support climate change met to formally call the international community to protect the environment ahead of that UN climate change conference set for the end of the month. In his address, which was handed out but not read to save time, Pope Francis underlined three concepts that could shed light, quote, on our effort to care for our common home: openness to interdependence and sharing, the dynamism of love, and the call to respect. And he stressed this: everything is interconnected. The world must come together not only to realize the harmful effects of human action, but also identify behaviors and solutions. How do you think this message and this event, Ed, have been received?
So I think he was really wanting to push this agenda, the COP26 agenda, which is this UN conference on climate change, which is taking place in Glasgow at the end of the month. And I think he was wanting to the Pope was really wanting to show that he supports this, and get these other faith leaders also to back it. And it does seem to have been, I think, for those who are organising it, I think they were very, very happy with this. But as I say, it brought together 40 faith leaders, 33 came to Rome for it, and they signed this appeal really to try and get nations to step up their action against climate change. But I thought what was interesting about this meeting was that they didn't include any of those who were skeptical voices of climate change, and in fact they thought it would complicate it, so they didn't. And I think because they also had a sort of ambitious targets for this, or ambitious goals for this meeting, so they weren't included.
Earlier this week, you reported that 3 Swiss guards have voluntarily left the Pope's army, and another 3 are on temporary suspension after refusing to comply with the Vatican's COVID vaccine mandate. You also report that as many as 30 guards had been resisting the mandatory vaccine as recently as July, and even the commander of the guards only received the vaccine a few days ago after being threatened. Why is the Vatican coming down so hard on employees regarding this vaccine? And is there any tolerance or discussion of a religious exemption or natural immunity?
Yes, well, they've been in lockstep with the government throughout all of COVID, really, at the Vatican. I mean, they've been following very much what the Italian government has been doing. Of course, they brought in their own Green Pass in August, and now the Vatican's doing the same. But yes, they're being pretty strict about it. Also with the Swiss Guard, who they say, the other militaries around the world also have mandatory vaccinations, and so should the Swiss Guard. But of course, it contravenes the doctrinal notes put out by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith last year, which said that mandatory vaccines shouldn't be allowed; they must be voluntary. So it certainly breaches that. But yes, it's a mystery in a way why the Vatican is being quite so hard about this, especially when it's had no deaths within the Vatican from COVID, and the last case was in October last year, so a year ago.
Wow. Ed, we will leave it there. Thank you for the information, the insight, and of course the great reportage. And you can follow Ed Pentin's reporting at the National Catholic Register. Ed's most recent book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates, is available now at bookstores everywhere and at the EWTN catalog. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Raymond.
Steve Mosher is up next. But first, over the last few days, I've been pondering the questions sent to the bishops of the world to consider in preparation of this global synod on synodality. This is really a global listening session for the Church. Of course, the biggest question is who decides which voices are heard and which are ignored. So I thought it might be instructive to accompany the Church on this synodal journey and open the process up to you, the viewers and listeners of the world over. Among the topics the Church wants to explore are how teachings on the family from Scripture and the magisterium are diffused, marriage according to the natural law, pastoral care in difficult marital situations. They want to look at unions of same-sex couples and the openness of married couples to life. Now, the organizers want to hear from the people of God, and so do we. So I thought we'll isolate 5 topics that you're most concerned about right now. Go to Twitter at WorldOverLive, or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. We want you to give us your list of the top 5 topics you would like clarity on, what you would like the Church to focus on at this moment, the issues you want to hear more about. And in the coming months, we'll feature World Over Synod specials, where we invite church leaders and experts on a given topic to have a lively conversation. We'll even take your questions. What are the burning issues in the Church that you think need attention right now? Go to worldover@ewtn.com. That's our email address. Or you can tweet us at WorldOverLive. I'll even put the question up on my Facebook page, and I'll announce the results in a few weeks. This is a chance for you to shape our programming and to allow your voice to be heard in a global synod of sorts. Welcome to the World Over Synod. I can't wait to hear from you all. China's People's Liberation Army sent nearly 150 warplanes into Taiwanese Air Defense Identification Zone in the first 4 days of October, requiring Taiwan to scramble jets and issue warnings. Why is China doing this now, and what could come next? Joining me to discuss this and much more, the president of the Population Research Institute, author of The Bully of Asia, Stephen Mosher. Steve, thanks for being here. The aggression we saw from China over the weekend and earlier this week towards Taiwan is concerning. China has claimed Taiwan since 1949. It's threatened a military takeover if Taiwan should ever formally declare its independence. What do you make of China's timing, and why the increased aggression now?
Well, I think it's very clear why we're seeing increased aggression towards Taiwan. We have the absolute humiliating debacle of the United States leaving Afghanistan, leaving American citizens behind, leaving hundreds, thousands of people who helped us, who may have green cards, there at the mercy of the Taliban. China has already moved in forces, by the way, to reportedly to take over the Bagram Air Base, which we conveniently left for them with all of our equipment. So now I think they see America as weak, and now they're moving more and more aggressively to try to take over democratic Taiwan. Now, the good news is last year, we quietly sent American service members. The Trump administration sent a small contingent of American forces to Taiwan to train local army units. About 24 members of the U.S. Special Operations Forces, some Marines are there to help with small boat training. That's really important because it signals to China that we're serious about helping democratic Taiwan to defend itself against communist China. And, you know, we had U.S. military officials earlier this year, people like General Milley, testify that, well, China does have designs on Taiwan within the next 6 years, but, you know, we have some time. If those timeline predictions are anywhere close to what the timeline predictions regarding, I don't know, the Afghan government's ability to resist a Taliban takeover, then the American-trained Taiwanese forces may be tested sooner rather than later, Raymond.
Yeah, you're right. During an interview with ABC Australia, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu had this to say when asked if he thought Chinese President Xi would act on the threats he's made to Taiwan. Listen.
We are very concerned that China is going to launch a war against Taiwan at some point. For instance, if their internal situation is getting more serious than before, and in the very classical way of understanding about the authoritarianism, they might launch a crisis externally in order to divert domestic attention. So in the recent power ration or power outages in China, that is something that we have been observing very carefully because we are concerned if the domestic discontent or economic slowdown is getting very serious, Taiwan might become a target of this authoritarianism to divert its domestic attention.
Steve, how likely is that scenario?
Well, I think it's fairly likely. We certainly can't rule it out because what people don't realize is that China is in the middle of multiple crises right now. We've talked before about the birth dearth, the fact that China's population is aging and dying. Their economy is going to go slowly downhill because they have too few workers, too few young people to fuel the economy. Secondly, they have an energy crunch. They shot themselves in the foot, metaphorically speaking, by banning Australian coal. And now they have an energy shortage, brownouts, blackouts in Chinese cities that's slowing down industrial production. The other thing that I wrote about recently in the New York Post was this: they're killing off billionaires. Xi Jinping, dictator Xi Jinping, is a devout communist, and over 100 billionaires have been arrested, tortured, killed, sometimes suicided, which means you push them off a 20-story building and pretend that it's suicide, and their assets are being confiscated. They're killing off slowly the high-tech sector of the Chinese economy. That will hurt them as well. So multiple crises, all created by Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. Would they seek a foreign adventure to divert the Chinese people's attention from the collapse of the property market, the collapse of the economy, the fact the lights are going out and it's going to get very cold this winter? Absolutely.
The defense minister in Taiwan is saying that if China launched an all-out war against it, they would fight to the end. What threat does that pose to the balance of power in the region were Beijing to move against Taiwan?
Well, here's the thing. I lived on Taiwan for several years. I speak the local language. I've written books about Taiwan. I actually wrote a book about a fictional Chinese invasion of Taiwan where Taiwan wins. The Chinese people will fight. They have said in polls a vast majority will resist a aggressive takeover of the island. They do not want to suffer the same fate as Tibet or Hong Kong being crushed by communist tyranny. And the other thing is Taiwan is the linchpin of the defensive perimeter around China. It links Japan and South Korea in the north with the Philippines and our allies Australia in the south. If you lose Taiwan, you give the People's Liberation Army Navy open access to the Pacific Ocean, and you break that defensive perimeter. That's why Japan has recently said, Raymond, that they will help with the defense of Taiwan. That was a breakthrough. That's nothing that Japan has ever said before.
On Tuesday, President Biden had this to say to reporters when asked about China's provocation over Taiwan. Watch.
I've spoken with Xi about Taiwan. We agree we'll abide by the Taiwan agreement. That's what we are. And we made it clear that I don't think he should be doing anything other than abiding by the agreement.
Abiding by the agreement. What does that mean, Steve? How much influence does this administration have when dealing with China?
No, I have no idea what President Biden is saying. There is no agreement between the United States and China concerning the future of Taiwan. There is an understanding, which is a very important distinction in diplomatic parlance. The United States acknowledges that China says and Taiwan says that there's only one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. That's all we have done. We have not agreed anything beyond that. This whole administration's approach to China is one of, let's solve the problem of trade, let's solve the problem of the pandemic, let's solve the problem of human rights. They don't realize that this is naive. The truth is that China is bent on global domination and the United States is in the way. China is in a war with the United States across all domains. We know the economic, the psychological, the biological, all domains except the kinetic. We're not firing bullets at each other. And if we enjoy peace through strength in the future, that won't happen. But China has been at war with us for decades. We need to understand that. You can't solve the Taiwan problem without stepping back and realizing that this is part of a larger problem of the Chinese Communist Party being aggressive, not just towards Taiwan. It has threatened to nuke Japan. It has threatened aggressive action, taken aggressive action towards India. It is an aggressive expansionist power across all of its frontiers.
No, we shouldn't even be trading with them at this point. Just on the human rights abuses alone, China's foreign ministry said it was the U.S. that is being provocative and harming regional peace with its arms sales to Taiwan and warships sailing regularly through the Taiwan Strait. He added, quote, China is resolutely opposed to this and takes necessary countermeasures. Engaging in Taiwan independence is a dead end. China will take all steps needed and firmly smash any Taiwan independence plots. Is some of this Chinese saber-rattling a response to the U.S. sale of those nuclear-powered subs to Australia a few weeks ago, which is also pro-Taiwan, by the way?
Well, yes, and Australia and India and Japan are all stepping up now and realizing how important Taiwan is to the defense of the region and to the need to constrain China, the Chinese Communist Party. And look, I think that Beijing sees that we were humiliated in the Afghan debacle, and it's even more important now, post-Afghanistan, that we support Taiwan. You know, we tried and failed to impose a functioning democracy on the Afghan people. We spent lots of blood, time, and treasure doing that, failed. The Taiwanese succeeded in setting up a functioning democracy on the island, and it's important that we don't abandon them. Taiwan is really China's hope for the future. Taiwan is a fully functioning democracy. It gives hope to the people on the mainland that one day they too may enjoy human rights and freedom. They can see it happening 90 miles away on Taiwan. And of course, that's exactly why the Chinese Communist Party wants to kill this example of a fully functioning free country before the ideas of democracy infect the people on the mainland.
Steve, before I let you go, I have to return to the homeland very quickly. I wanted to talk about the Hyde Amendment, Senator Joe Manchin insisting that that be inserted in the budget bill. But there's this other big story that really is getting so little attention. The University of Pittsburgh is under fire after announcing that a D.C.-based law firm would conduct an independent investigation of its fetal tissue practices. The investigation was announced after allegations of human organ harvesting at Pitt surfaced. Multiple physicians tell Fox News that Pitt's previous statements pointed to the possibility that organs were extracted from live fetuses. Your thoughts on this story? We hear about organ harvesting in China as a form of torture. How can this be happening here in the United States?
Well, sadly, it is happening here in the United States in the name of scientific research. It's bad enough that the Biden administration wants to allow dismemberment abortions again, but to deliver babies alive and then harvest their organs, some of which are then going to be not just studied in a lab, but transplanted onto rats and mice and laboratory animals to see how they function, is beyond horrific. It's beyond barbaric. We need to stop this. I'm afraid that though we're dealing with the most radically pro-abortion administration ever in American history. They have no concern for human life, born or, as far as I'm concerned, after birth or before birth. And it's going to get worse until we have a new election.
Wow. We will leave it there. Bully of Asia by Stephen Mosher is the definitive work on China's plans for global dominance. It's available at bookstores everywhere. Steve, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond.
He is the auxiliary bishop of ASTANA, Kazakhstan, and he's a well-known defender of traditional church teaching. He joins me this evening to share his thoughts on the Synodal Path, True Liturgical Reform, and his soon-to-be-released book, The Catholic Mass. Please welcome Bishop ATHANASIUS Schneider back to the program. Your Excellency, thank you for being here. I want to start with some important news. I spoke earlier with Edward PENTIN about the recent developments at the German Synodal Path. As we mentioned, a dozen statements were being considered, including the blessing of same-sex unions, and even one that seems to question the need for an ordained priesthood. This week's plenary session was called off due to a lack of quorum. Too many bishops stuck around to the end of the meeting, making it impossible to conduct business. What do you make of this so-called synodal path? And does this slowdown indicate some resistance?
A synodal path or a synod has the aim to strengthen the faith and to clarify the faith, to defend the faith. This was since the apostles, the aim of a synod. And so to transmit the integrity of faith. And now what we are witnessing in Germany with the synodal path is the contrary. It is an evident and direct denial of the divine truth in the case of homosexuality and the hierarchical structure of the church which Christ gave us. So we have to resist against this work of destruction of faith.
The German bishops have now extended that synodal path to 2023. They say the path and these action items are necessary to reinvigorate the church after the sex abuse crisis, etc. Do you believe that capitulating to the world, catching up, if you will, with the times, is the best way for the church to engage the German faithful or any faithful?
No, always when the church capitulates before the world, it is becoming weaker. And we have to be the contrary. We have to, of course, we have to acknowledge the evil which was perpetrated inside the church, but nevertheless we have to be confident and have the self-sureness that the truth remains, and we have to start a renewal of the life of the priest to holiness, the life of faithful new families. This is our task, and we have not to be intimidated by the world, by these cases which we have. The church will always remain a church of sinners, but in the same time a church of saints. And we have to continue to proclaim the truth of God and the beauty of a chaste, holy Christian life.
In your mind, Archbishop, what is needed now, not only in Germany but all over the world, to reinvigorate the church and to make her relevant to the Catholics in the pews, which I think is part of the aim here of this synod?
The most important and basic and most urgent thing is to return to Christ, to the truth, to turn to the Lord again, to His revelation, to His truth, which we received from the apostles, from the saints throughout the 2 millennia in which the Church handed over us the beauty and the integrity of the Catholic faith. This we have to restate, and to restate the centrality of God, of His Word, the centrality of Christ in the liturgy, to give Him absolute priority, and only then the Church will have fruitful and more fruitful spiritual mission and evangelization in this time.
Archbishop Schneider, when one looks at these synods, and they're going on really for the better part of a year or two, it seems there's an attempt here to reposition Vatican II and redefine it, if you will, after the clear definitions articulated by John Paul II, Benedict XVI, who are actual men of the council, we should mention. Is that what's happening here? Some have suggested that may be the case.
Yes, this is an attempt, the synodal ways, or to transform the church or the local churches in groups of discussions according to the parliament style. This is foreign to the tradition of the church. We have not to to establish the truth, or to seek the truth. We have already the truth received from the apostles, from the church, and we have to again to restate the beauty of the Catholic faith and the truth in this time. This should be the task of a council, of an ecumenical council, and of synods. And therefore, I hope that in this process, so-called synodal process in these years, there will be also heard the voices of the faithful of Catholics who love the faith and the liturgy and the holiness of the Church of all ages.
Since we last spoke, Pope Francis released his motu proprio, Guardians of the Tradition, placing restrictions on the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass worldwide. What do you make of the rationale for that motu proprio at this moment? And have you observed any abuses that have been alleged to be tied to the old Mass?
To my experience, I had a great experience in visiting communities and parishes and families who are attracted and love the traditional liturgy, and I could not observe really what Pope Francis accuses these people as to be divisive or to fight against Vatican II. Nothing of this. Maybe there could be singular cases, as in every community, and therefore this accusation is an evident pretext, because behind this motu proprio there is another agenda. This decisive rejection of tradition, of what the Church, not only during centuries, but during millennium, prayed in this ancient traditional rite, which was already before the Council of Trent the identical rite and order of Mass as after the Council of Trent, and which brought so many fruits in the life of the saints. And therefore, this traditional rite is so expressively stressing the centrality of God, the eternity, the sacredness, and therefore it is it could be this kind of Mass which transmits and proclaims this truth, the eternity, supernaturality, to grace, is an obstacle for the agenda which is now promoted, unfortunately, by the Holy See, primarily an agenda of the temporal things, the earthly things. And so such a rite, the existence and the spread and the growth of such a rite, Christocentric, is maybe a reproach also for those high-ranking churchmen who chosen the earthly temporal agenda. This could be also a possibility to understand the background of this motu proprio.
Speaking of the liturgy, you have a new book coming out in January, The Catholic Mass, Steps to Restore the Centrality of God in the Liturgy. Why did you feel you had to write this book now? I mean, it seems prescient in the midst of all this liturgical upheaval and questioning.
Yes, I think that we have to be very, very honest and to go to the roots of the crisis. And in general, the deepest root of the crisis within the life of the Church since the Council, and which now reached its culmination, it is precisely that man puts himself in the center, and Christ, God, was put aside. And this is the problem. And in a special manner, this anthropocentric attitude is manifested daily in the manner of celebration of the Holy Mass. especially in the Novus Ordo, and then towards the people celebrated, which is really a demonstration of the man-centered style of life and prayer. And this is for me the deepest cause of the current crisis. We have to return and to give Christ the precedence, the primacy, and the center in the manner of celebrating liturgy. And this will be the healing, the crisis of the Church.
You divide the book into 12 chapters, each explaining what the Catholic Mass is. Mass is prayer, it's ritual, thanksgiving, sacrifice, etc. These chapters really are a series of interviews, correct? Why did you decide to structure the book this way? And what was the most important aspect of the Mass that you wanted readers to understand?
Yes, we have to understand the meaning, the essence, what is the Holy Mass. And from this comes the manner of behavior of the rites. And therefore, as the classical philosophical motto says, agere sequitur esse. The acts flow out from the being. And so we have to, again, to show all the richness of the meaning of the Holy Mass. And therefore I started with the first topic. The Mass is adoration. This is the first meaning of our being created. This will be all eternity our first task, to adore God with the holy angels in heaven. And this was the primary intention and aim of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, the adoration, the veneration, the glorification of the Father, of the Holy Trinity. And he did this through his sacrifice of love for the Father and for us, to redeeming us by this supreme act of adoration and love, redeeming us from our sins. And therefore the Holy Mass is substantial, inseparably, an sacrifice, redeeming sacrifice of the highest and most sublime adoration of God. This we have to stress. And from this flows out our salvation and the graces of transformation of our lives and Holy Communion.
Archbishop Schneider, Benedict XVI established in Summorum Pontificum that the ordinary form and the extraordinary form are one rite, the Roman rite. How should the two forms coexist, in your opinion?
They are quite different, we have to be honest to say, the traditional rite and the Novus Ordo. So I think it would be more honest to say they are really, they belong to the great rite, the Roman rite, but the Novus Ordo was so much drastically changed that it's really different. It's kind of two rites. We have to be, and Pope Francis, in one of his recent interviews, he states this and says that those priests who now want to celebrate the traditional Mass has to be compared, or it's a kind of bi-ritualism. So the Pope Francis itself said this is a bi-ritualism. Bi-ritualism. And so, as for example, the Pope Francis mentioned, as priests can be Latin priests celebrate the Byzantine priests, so they give the indult of bi-ritualism. So the Pope also compared the traditional rite form of the Mass and the Novus Ordo. And in this case, it is evident there are quite different forms, rites, and it should be, I think, in the future, they both should become closer and be one rite, or maybe with some small differences, but substantially the Novus Ordo has to go back to the essence of the traditional rite of all times.
Give me a sense, before I let you go, what is your great hope that readers will come away with from your book, The Catholic Mass, when it's published in January? What's the message you want them to take away and the reason you wrote it?
My hope is that those, the faithful and the priests who will read this book, will again discover the richness, the spiritual, the doctrinal richness of the Mass, which Christ gave us as the greatest gift for His Church here on earth, the Holy Mass, the sacrifice of the Holy Mass, that they can discover the beauty, the richness of this rite of the Holy Mass, the Mass itself, and then also in the rite, how to celebrate, how to behave yourself during Holy Mass, to be united deeper with Christ, and to be grateful for this unspeakable gift which Christ left us on earth, His holy sacrifice on the cross in the Holy Mass, and His body and blood, which is nourishing us on our journey to eternity. So this is my intention, to strengthen the priests and faithful to discover this beauty of the Holy Mass, and then to bear fruits, more fruits in their daily life.
Bishop ATHANASIUS Schneider, I thank you for being with me. The Catholic Mass, Steps to Restore the Centrality of God in the Liturgy, is available from Sophia Press. It'll be available in January at bookstores everywhere. Bishop, thank you for being here.
You're welcome. God bless you.
Before we go, Pope Francis announced this week that he will declare Saint Irenaeus of Lyon a doctor of the Church. Irenaeus was a 2nd century bishop and writer revered by both Catholic and Orthodox Christians. He is notable for battling the heresy of Gnosticism by upholding church teaching that Christ was both God and man, human and divine. Saint Irenaeus will be given the title Doctor Unitatis, Doctor of Unity. That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen, and I'll be looking for your suggestions for our World Over Synod. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.